Here you can see the difference in sizes of the intake. This is the 14T billet wheel, the upgraded, and this is the stock. So it looks like that we have a rear and a front turbo. This is the rear turbo. You can see the oil supply line here matches this one, and if you put this one in the same orientation, this is the oil drain line on this side. So this oil supply line lines up with this one. So this is the one that's clocked for the rear turbo. So now that I figured out that this is the rear turbo orientation, I'm going to start to transfer over the line, this oil supply line, and this Waste Gate Actuator bracket. So in order to get this oil line off, I'll be prying with something sharp here, underneath here, and then also a fat screwdriver underneath here. Taking precaution not to put any pressure on the pipe here itself. So there it came. This is the new oil line, O-ring. This is the part number, and it'll be going here. I'm going to be replacing this old one. So there it is with the new turbo in place, the upgraded. A few things to note is before you take it apart, note the orientation of this V-band clamp and try to put it back in the same spot. Also, when you put it together, make sure that the alignment pin is engaged, and that will ensure your correct clocking. And it's very small, so you can actually damage that pin, I would think, if it's not engaged. So it's a good idea to clean things up before you go back together. Here I'm using a piece of Scotch-Brite to clean up this exhaust manifold. what I'll be doing now is removing the old O-rings, cleaning up the surface, and installing the new O-rings on these parts. So the new O-ring's been put on, and oil's been put on it, so it's ready to wiggle in place. Try to put these oil lines back together. This one from the rear turbo goes into the block. I can get it over there. Okay, there it goes. There looks to be some kind of crud left up on this mating surface of the O-ring. Some hard water deposits, so I'm going to clean that off with this flat X-Acto blade. And here's a new gasket for the oil drain line for the front turbo. It's the same gasket for the rear turbo also. Now I found out sometimes these V-bands are hard to get on, and it's usually because that these heat shields are too close to the turbo here, so I'm going to try to push this heat shield down a little bit and make some space so that V-band has space to expand. Looks like I'm having some clearance issues here with getting this up, and I think it's because the bracket of the rear turbo was tightened down and the bracket is not flexing in the back where I can push this towards the rear of the car in order to get that past the gasket. I don't want to force it and mess up the gasket, so I'm going to unloosen the rear catalytic converter downpipe bolt on the back to see if I can get a little bit more play out of this so I can get it in. So before I bring the subframe up all the way, looks like the engine mount's already engaged somewhat. So before I bring it up all the way, I'm going to try to align the engine mount bolts to the subframe. So on this bolt I changed out to a hex head because it's a lot easier to get on for the position that it's at. This is the plastic coolant line bolt to the subframe. this is the steering rack nut with some chromate tape on there to stick it onto my wrench so it'll stay on there. And then I'm going to snake this up in there and put the bolt in. Okay. Using this press in place caulk to hold that nut onto the socket so I can get it down there without losing it. So after filling the coolant system with a 50-50 mix of coolant and distilled water, I'm going to bleed the system now, but first I hooked up this battery jumper to support the battery. So this is the procedure for bleeding the coolant system. Insert your key, turn it on without putting your foot on the brake so it doesn't start, and you put your temperature to 84 degrees, that's all the way up, and the fan at the lowest setting, and then you press your foot on the accelerator pedal for approximately 12 seconds and you should hear the water pump starting on and off. It should continue for about 12 minutes and then it'll be done. Now that the bleeding is complete, I'm going to recheck the level of the coolant. And it looks like I need to add some, so I'm going to go ahead and add that until the indicator comes up. So I finished adding the coolant, and the indicator is showing that it's full now. I'm closing off this bleed screw. So I measured the motor oil when it came out, and I had about 4.5 quarts. So I put 4.5 quarts back in. So what I'm doing now is I'm disconnecting the coil wires to see if I can crank this without the engine starting. The reason why I'm cranking it is to prime the turbos with oil before it actually starts. Okay, so the turbo should be primed. I'm going to hook up the wires to the coils again and try to start it. So I'm going to start the car now, and when you first start the car, it's the power steering fluid in the power steering is still not bled, so the power steering is going to make a lot of noise until you can bleed that out. So I'm going to go ahead and start it up and show you how to bleed that. So you just rotate the steering back and forth until you hear the noise of the power steering quiet down. Well, it's running. I left the covers off the bottom of the car to check for leaks.